Welcome back for another deep dive. You guys sent in some seriously interesting stuff this time around, and today we're heading to Middle Earth
Yeah,
to take a closer look at the relationship between Théoden and Éowyn from The Lord of the Rings.
I'm excited to get into this one.
Me too. This is going to be a fascinating discussion, so just in case anyone needs a quick reminder, Théoden, King of Rohan. Éowyn's his niece. But their connection, it goes way beyond just family, right?
Oh, absolutely. Tolkien uses their relationship to explore some really deep themes. You
Mm.
know, duty, ambition, and that whole pressure of societal expectations. You know, how many times have we all felt those pressures in our own lives?
Right. And that's exactly what we're going to unpack today. What makes Théoden and Éowyn so compelling, both individually and as a pair, and what their story can teach us about finding strength and forging our own paths, even when it feels like the world's pushing us in a different direction.
Sometimes the answers are more complicated than they seem at first.
Okay, so let's start with those first impressions. When we meet Théoden, he's not exactly a picture of a valiant king. Grief-stricken, manipulated by Wormtongue, almost like a prisoner in his own kingdom. But then there's Éowyn, his niece, vibrant, strong-willed, like she's bursting with this desire for something more. So how do you see this contrast playing out in the bigger picture?
Well, it's such a brilliant setup. Tolkien immediately establishes these two opposing forces within the same family. You've got Théoden trapped by despair and this external manipulation, almost a representation of Rohan itself under Saruman's shadow. Then you have Éowyn, whose confinement is more about societal expectations. She's limited by what's seen as a proper role for a woman of her station.
Two different kinds of prisons. And of course, we can't talk about Théoden without mentioning that incredible moment
Yeah.
when Gandalf breaks Wormtongue's hold over him.
Oh, that scene. It just gives me chills every time I read it. Tolkien's description of Théoden stepping into the sunlight after years under Wormtongue's spell is so powerful.
Like he can finally breathe again, right, after being suffocated for so long. And that's just the start of his transformation. We see him rise to the occasion at Helm's Deep, rally his people with that stirring speech at the Pelennor Fields.
And his death, even though it's tragic, it's portrayed with incredible dignity. He dies a hero's death, having reclaimed his honor and fulfilling his duty.
But beyond the heroic aspect, how do you think Tolkien uses Theoden's death scene to convey that deeper meaning of duty? It could have been a much more gruesome end.
That's a good point. By giving Théoden a peaceful death in the middle of that chaotic battle, Tolkien elevates the idea of duty beyond just being a brave warrior. It becomes about spiritual strength, about facing overwhelming odds with grace. What do you think, does that resonate with you?
Absolutely. Makes you think about the different ways we all face our own battles and how courage can show itself even in the quietest moments. Turning to Éowyn, though, she's not waiting for someone to rescue her. There's that incredible line where she says, "I am no man's daughter. I am no man's chattel."
Mm.
It's just so powerful.
Oh, pure fire. It just perfectly sums up Éowyn's frustration. With the limitations placed on her as a woman in Rohan, she wants agency, the freedom to choose her own path, even if it means going against tradition. And her actions speak louder than words.
Talk about defying expectations. She disguises herself as a man. To fight in the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, that takes guts.
So what's Tolkien saying about societal expectations and inner strength?
He's turning the whole concept of heroism on its head, not just with her bravery, but by making her the one to slay the Witch King, the leader of the Nazgul. Remember the prophecy. It was said, "Not by the hand of man shall he fall." And that makes Erwin's victory even more significant.
She accomplishes what no man could, fulfilling the prophecy and shattering those rigid societal expectations. It's like Tolkien is saying that true strength often comes from unexpected places, especially from those who are underestimated and overlooked. Exactly. It really speaks to Tolkien's view on the power of the undervalued, particularly women in a male-dominated society. He's suggesting those qualities traditionally associated with femininity, like compassion and empathy. They're just as important as the stereotypically masculine ones, like physical strength and aggression.
That's fascinating. It's like he's saying true heroism needs a balance of both. But Éowyn is more than just a warrior, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. Her character's so nuanced. We see her softer side, too, especially in the Houses of Healing where she cares for the wounded.
It really highlights her complexity, this fierce warrior facing down the Witch King, but also with this incredible capacity for compassion and healing. It almost challenges the traditional definition of a hero, right?
Definitely. That's what makes her so compelling. She embodies both heroism and sacrifice. Those are Tolkien's own words. She's not afraid to fight for what she believes in, but she's also willing to put the needs of others before her own.
That's a powerful message, especially in a story like The Lord of the Rings, which is ultimately about good overcoming evil. But bringing this back to Théoden and Éowyn, how does their dynamic play into those bigger themes? Duty choice, breaking free from expectations. It seems like they're on these parallel journeys, but struggling to understand each other.
That's a great observation. Their relationship is definitely one of the most complex and fascinating parts of the story. You have Théoden bound by tradition and his responsibility as king, and then you have Éowyn yearning for something more than what's expected of her. It creates this tension between duty and personal fulfillment.
And it's heartbreaking at times, especially when Théoden says goodbye to Éowyn before riding into the Battle of the Pelennor Fields with those words, "Dear sister-daughter."
Oh, that scene gets me every time. It's such a poignant moment of reconciliation. You can feel the depth of their love for each other, even though they haven't really resolved their differences. It's like he's finally seeing her. Not just his niece, but as the strong, capable woman she is. But tragically, it comes as he's facing his own mortality.
Knowing what happens next makes it even harder. But before we get ahead of ourselves, how do you see this tension playing into those larger themes?
If we zoom out and look at the bigger picture,
Mm.
I think Théoden and Éowyn represent two sides of the same coin. Théoden embodies the path of duty, and Éowyn embodies the struggle for personal choice.
That's a really interesting way to frame it. So it's not just about their individual journeys, but how those contrasting paths reflect these larger universal themes.
Exactly. And their individual triumphs highlight how complex those themes are. Théoden's renewal comes from accepting his duty, even though it leads to his death. And Éowyn's victory over the Witch King shows the incredible strength. That can come from challenging expectations and forging your own path.
Almost like Tolkien is saying that true strength is finding a balance between those two forces, duty and personal fulfillment.
Isn't that a struggle we all face in our own lives? Trying to reconcile what we have to do with what we dream of doing. It's what makes Théoden and Éowyn's story so relatable even today.
It's that timeless quality. Their struggles resonate with something deep inside us, something that goes beyond a specific time or place. That desire to break free from what society expects, to find our own purpose, to face our fears and fight for what we believe in, it's all there in their story. And I think that's why The Lord of the Rings still resonates with people, readers and viewers of all ages.
Yeah.
Because these characters are dealing with universal human struggles that we can all connect with.
Absolutely. And there's something so powerful about seeing characters like Éowyn, who are often overlooked, rise to the occasion and achieve incredible things. It reminds us that even when the odds feel overwhelming, we all have that potential for greatness, and that sometimes the greatest strength comes from challenging the status quo and making your own path.
It's inspiring, right? Makes you want to go out and slay a few witch kings of your own. But before we get too carried away, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've discussed.
We've delved into the contrasting personalities of Théoden and Éowyn, explored their symbolic prisons, and witnessed their individual triumphs. We've also touched on the tension in their relationship and how it reflects those themes of duty, personal choice, and breaking free from expectations.
Quite a journey. And we've only scratched the surface. But before we dive even deeper, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more insights into Théoden and Éowyn in The Lord of the Rings.
You know, while we're talking about heroism, there's this one detail from the source material that really struck me. Tolkien describes Éowyn as embodying both heroism and sacrifice. Seems simple at first glance, but when you really think about it, what do you make of that? Does that resonate with you at all?
It totally does. I think it speaks to how complex her character is. She's not just this warrior charging into battle. She's a woman making incredibly tough choices, trying to navigate a world that doesn't seem to have a place for what she wants.
Exactly. And that's where the sacrifice comes in. Think about her time in the Houses of Healing, taking care of the wounded. She could have just focused on her own desire for glory, dismissed those duties as beneath her. But she didn't.
It's like she understands that real strength isn't just about fighting. It's about using your abilities to help others, even if it doesn't get you recognition.
And that goes back to what we were saying before, about the power of those who are often overlooked. Éowyn's willingness to step into that healing role, to embrace those qualities of compassion and caregiving, it makes her a more well-rounded hero. It challenges what we think of when we hear the word hero.
It's like Tolkien is saying that true victory, the kind that really matters, often comes from those quieter acts of service and selflessness. Which actually makes me think, we've talked a lot about Tolkien's writing. But what about the movies? Did Peter Jackson capture the essence of Théoden and Éowyn in the films? Especially the nuances of their relationship.
I think he did a pretty amazing job, all things considered. I mean, adapting a story as complex as The Lord of the Rings for the big screen. It's no easy task. You have to make some compromises.
Oh, definitely. But it's the little details, the choices the filmmakers make that can really elevate a film adaptation. Like Bernard Hill as Théoden, I mean. He was incredible. He really embodied that world-weary king.
He was brilliant, especially in those scenes where Theoden's struggling with Wormtongue's influence.
Yeah.
You can see it all on his face. And then later when he's leading his people into battle, there's this incredible mix of vulnerability and determination. It's like you can see the despair just falling away and being replaced by the sense of purpose.
Absolutely. And that scene where he says to Éowyn, I would see you smile again, knowing what's going to happen, it just adds so much more weight to it. It's like he's finally acknowledging her pain, her longing, but it almost feels too late.
It really captures their whole relationship in that one moment. The love, the tension, and the fact that he doesn't stop her from going to war. He knows he can't hold her back anymore.
It's like a form of acceptance. He finally sees her for who she is, recognizes her strength and courage. But I'm also wondering, do you think the movies do justice to Éowyn's inner conflict? Sometimes it feels like they focus more on the warrior side and less on that yearning for something more than what's expected of her.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's always tough to translate someone's inner world to the screen, especially with a story as action-packed as The Lord of the Rings. But I think the extended editions give us some glimpses into that turmoil.
Oh, really? Like what kind of things are you thinking of?
There are those shots of Éowyn looking off into the distance, as if she can see beyond Rohan. And those quiet moments, those little expressions of longing, I think they really convey how much she wants a different kind of life, even if it's not always spelled out in the dialogue.
That's interesting. It's like those visuals are giving us access to her thoughts, her dreams. And it makes me think about how important it is to pay attention to those subtle things, not just in movies, but in life too. Sometimes the most profound truths are hidden right there beneath the surface.
I like that. It's those layers of meaning, those nuances, that make a story so captivating. And I think that's why people keep coming back to Lord of the Rings, both the books and the movies. Because there's always something new to discover, something that speaks to you in a different way each time.
So as we're wrapping up our deep dive into Théoden and Éowyn, what do you think is the most important thing for our listeners to take away from their story? Why is their journey in Middle-earth still relevant to us today?
That's a great question. I think it all comes back to those universal themes we've been talking about. The struggle to balance duty and personal fulfillment, the courage to challenge expectations, the strength we find when we face adversity. These are challenges that everyone faces, regardless of time or culture.
It's like their story reflects our own internal struggles, our own search for meaning and purpose.
Exactly. And that's why their story is still so powerful. Because it reminds us that even in a world that often feels dark and uncertain, there's always hope. There's always the possibility for renewal, for redemption, for finding that inner strength to overcome whatever obstacles we face.
It reminds us that we all have the potential for greatness, even if we don't wear a crown or fight with a sword. Maybe the most heroic battles are the ones we fight within ourselves.
Beautifully said. And maybe their story can inspire us to face our own metaphorical witch kings. You know, those fears and limitations that hold us back.
That's a powerful thought, and it makes me wonder, if The Lord of the Rings is ultimately a story about hope and resilience, what does Théoden and Éowyn's story tell us about finding those qualities within ourselves? You know, when we're facing those huge obstacles, those expectations that box us in, or maybe some personal struggle that has us feeling totally lost. Where do we find that inner strength to keep going? What do you think?
That's the question that stays with you, isn't it? It's tempting to say, well, they're just characters in a book. Their struggles are exaggerated for the story. But I think Tolkien's tapping into something very real about being human. He's showing us that even the most ordinary people can find amazing strength when they're pushed to their limits.
And that sometimes the greatest victories aren't about beating some outside enemy, but about overcoming our own doubts and fears.
Exactly. Like Éowyn's decision to ride into battle disguised as a man, it's not just about defying what society expects of her. It's about her refusing to let fear control her. And Théoden, even though he's old, he finds the strength to break free from Wormtongue and lead his people. It's about realizing it's never too late to take control of your life, to step into your true potential.
It's like they're both saying, I won't be defined by the limits other people put on me.
And isn't that a powerful message for everyone? Whether those limits come from society, from our own insecurities, or even from past experiences that have left us feeling defeated, Théoden and Éowyn remind us that we always have a choice. We can let those limitations define us, or we can choose to break free and make our own path.
But that takes a lot of courage, don't you think? It's one thing to talk about breaking free, but actually doing it, that's a whole other level of commitment.
Absolutely. It takes that inner strength, that spark of defiance that refuses to die out. And that's what makes their story so inspiring. It shows us that courage isn't about not feeling fear. It's about deciding to act, even though you're afraid. It's about choosing to fight for what you believe in, even when the odds are against you.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into Théoden and Éowyn, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from their story? What's the most important message for them as they go on their own journey?
I think it's the reminder that hope and resilience aren't just ideas. They're qualities that we can build within ourselves. They're choices we make every day, big and small. And even when we mess up or fall down, even when we feel lost, we always have the power to choose to get back up, to dust ourselves off and keep going.
That's beautifully said. And it reminds me of something you said earlier about how much their story resonates with us. It's like we see parts of ourselves and their struggles, their triumphs, their moments of weakness and strength.
And I think that's the magic of The Lord of the Rings. It's a story about epic battles and fantastical creatures, but deep down, it's about the human spirit. It's about the power of hope, the importance of community, and that unshakable belief that even in the darkest times, good will win in the end.
And maybe, just maybe, by listening to stories like this, by connecting with these characters who embody those qualities, we can learn to tap into those same strengths and resilience within ourselves.
It's a possibility worth exploring, right?
Right?
After all, stories have a way of showing us the hidden paths inside us, the paths that lead to courage, compassion, and our own unique kind of heroism.
That's a great way to put it. So for anyone listening who wants to explore Théoden and Éowyn more, I encourage you to go back to The Lord of the Rings, whether it's the books or the movies. Pay attention to the little details, the moments of understanding between the characters, and see how their story connects with you. You might be surprised by what you find.
And maybe you'll even be inspired to start your own journey of self-discovery with the courage to face your fears and the hope that even when things seem impossible, there's always a way forward.
That's the perfect note to end on. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you enjoyed exploring Théoden and Éowyn with us. Until next time, keep looking for those stories that spark your curiosity and fire up your imagination. And never forget the power you have to create your own epic adventure.